Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever it is, wherever you is. I'm Mr. Munkle, and this is Bible study number 2 because a few people enjoyed Bible study number 1, apparently. So if you want me to make more of these kinds of videos, please help a brother out by thumbs upping and subscribing to my channel because that support enables me to make more content. So today we're going to be having a look at the sheep and the goats from Matthew 25. Here's the plan. For our introduction, we're going to be looking at the context, being why are sheep and goats being spoken about and who is speaking about them. We're also going to look at when these things take place. Then we'll look at the bulk of the text and understand who the main characters are and what's being said, and towards the end we'll draw some conclusions as to what we have heard. As with many things in the Bible, to understand the text we have to look at the context. So when we look at all of chapter 25, we see that somebody is speaking, and this somebody appears to be speaking in parables. A parable being a made-up story used to illustrate a truth. So who is speaking and why? And who is this person speaking to? To answer these questions, we need to have a quick look at chapter 24. So in the beginning of chapter 24, verses 1 to 4, we see that the person speaking is in fact Jesus, and Jesus is speaking to his disciples. Jesus, having just left the temple in Jerusalem, looks back to Jerusalem and tells his disciples that a time is coming in the future when the temple and all of the surrounding area will be destroyed. This actually happened about 40 years later when the Roman army came and besieged Jerusalem and completely destroyed it. And Jesus' disciples, being really curious of the things to come, ask, when will this happen and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Your Bible translation might say the end of the world. So Jesus begins to speak, and as he speaks he builds a picture of things to happen in the future. But not just in the near future in Jerusalem, but Jesus also gazes ahead at the things planned for the nations of the world up until the time that Jesus comes back. This period is marked with certain events that absolutely must take place, namely a time of tribulation. So here are some of the elements that are to unfold. There will be persecution of people who follow Jesus, i.e. Christians. He says that wickedness will continue to increase, deception by people who claim to be the Messiah, great cosmic disturbances, and the gospel, the good news, is taken to the whole world. And once these things have taken place, we will see the return of the Son of Man with his angels and with the power to gather up his people. So we now know from this context that what we are talking about today is a picture of the end of the world. And so what we see in our verses in chapter 25 is a reality of that moment. It's a snapshot of events that will occur when this Son of Man returns with his angels. Let's go back to chapter 25. Now the verses that we're looking at today, 31 to 46, follow two parables. So remember, a parable is a made-up story used to describe an idea. And so you may hear these verses being referred to as the parable of the sheep and the goats. But these verses don't strictly adhere to that definition because the story itself has the framework of real events, as we see in verses 31 and 32. But it does also have parabolic elements such as sheep and goats. And even the flow of conversation, I imagine, won't take place in this exact way, but is designed to make specific points. So now we'll step through the verses and we'll see what is occurring at the end of the world. Verse 31 opens with Jesus talking about the Son of Man. So who is the Son of Man? Daniel, in the Old Testament some 600 years earlier, had a vision of the future in which he referred to someone called the Son of Man. And he said this, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." Also, we know that Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, Notably, after he was betrayed by Judas and arrested, the high priest of the Jewish leaders asked Jesus, this is Mark 14:61-62, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." So in these passages, Jesus is saying clearly that at the end of the world, after his death and his resurrection and return to heaven, he will come back as King of heaven and earth. Verse 31 says that he comes in his glory, which would be something visual of his divine qualities, meaning this will be something incredible to see and experience. It will definitely be like nothing anybody has ever seen. So there is again that image of Jesus' total authority as God. So Jesus sits down on his glorious throne, and verse 32, we see all the nations before him. We then see the people of the nations separated out like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. All the nations being, in context, the whole world, as we heard in 24:14. So let's take in the scale of this scene. What we have here at the end of the world is every person in the world, not just at a frozen point in history, but all the people that ever existed, called before the King of the heavens and the earth, who is on his throne. 2 Corinthians 5:10 says this, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad." So the King, Jesus, is described as a judge and also as a shepherd. And in the same way a shepherd has sheep and cares for them, so Jesus has his people. John 10:14-16, "I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father." If we take what Jesus said in that verse and place it in context of where we are in this text, you can't help but be in awe of the power of Jesus. Jesus is saying, every person that ever existed is standing before me, and I know every single one intimately. I know the things you've done, and I know if you belong to me or if you don't. But there's more than just the sheep standing before the king, as we see in this text. There are goats too. So why would a shepherd separate them out? Well, they are similar, but they're definitely not the same. Sheep are very passive. They are grazers. They eat at ground level and generally can be rounded up with ease by the shepherd. Goats are pretty much the opposite. They will browse for food and nibble at nearly everything they come across. But a defining trait for goats, which has long been understood, is their stubbornness. There's a great example of this on YouTube. Type "goats on a Jeep" into the YouTube search bar. You won't be disappointed. And so the shepherd will separate these two similar creatures out because ultimately the stubborn ones will just do their own thing and have no care for the master's commands. Jesus says, at the end of the world, this is how it will be with people. The people who know Jesus, the people who want to be with him and follow him, will go to his right side. And the people who don't know Jesus, those who have chosen not to listen to him and not to follow him, will go to his left. As we read on, we see that Jesus invites the people on the right, his sheep, into his kingdom and goes on to give some reasons behind the decision. He cites examples of all the times his people interacted with him personally. "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." But Jesus' followers don't recall the good deeds and raise the question, when did we do this for you? The King, Jesus, gives an astonishing answer. He says, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And then from verse 41 we have what is almost a mirror image of everything we just read, and it's very, very sad. Instead of an invite into the kingdom, the goats are to stay outside of the kingdom, which is described as an eternal fire and punishment, which is an eternity without God, in the place that was actually not prepared for humans, but for the devil and his angels, or demons, as they're more widely known as these days. So the devil and demons were once heavenly beings until they rebelled against God and were cast out of the kingdom. And again, we have some reasoning for this decision. Jesus says, "For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you did not look after me." Much like the sheep, the goats are perplexed as to when these things were supposed to have taken place. To which we get the reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." So who are these least people, and what is it to be least? Well, the word used in the Greek means smallest, which is not to say specifically in size, but maybe weaker in certain ways. Maybe a person is least socially, is lonely and needs friends. Maybe a person is least financially and needs food. Or maybe they are least in health and need looking after. But the least of which group of people? Jesus goes on to draw a direct connection between himself and these least people in verse 40 by saying that these people are his brothers and sisters. So who are Jesus' brothers and sisters? Matthew 12:46-50 says this: "While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, 'Your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you.' He replied to him, 'Who is my mother and who are my brothers?' Pointing to his disciples, he said, 'Here are my mother and brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.'" So Jesus' brothers and sisters are his people, his sheep. And the amazing thing is here that Jesus, the King of all creation, is saying, "I so care for my people that they are as family to me. And when you served them, you served me. But when you neglected them, you neglected me." I'm sure that anybody listening to this message will know what it's like to love someone to the point when something happens to them that's not very nice, you can feel it too. And I think and hope that everybody has experienced that at some point. And so what's going on here in this vision of the things to come is that on the last day, when all people are called before the King, everything will be laid down before him, and nothing can be hidden because the King sees everything. But if Jesus is calling us to account, the question is, does doing good things give you the golden ticket into heaven? And the answer is no. What's being said here is the outward actions of people are a mark of something much deeper, and that is in the heart. When Jesus recounts the good things that were done for him, the sheep's response was, "I don't recall doing that." The sheep did not recognize him because they were busy serving him. But for the goats, there was no time for considering Jesus in their actions at all. They did not recognize him because they were busy not serving him. And so as the chapter closes in verse 46, we see the picture of all people going into eternity. For the sheep, they go to live with the shepherd in the kingdom that he created, full of more good things than anybody is capable of imagining. For the goats, their eternity is in a place that is absent of that goodness. In Matthew 8, verse 12, it's noted as darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth, meaning this is a place of permanent sorrow and anger. It's also described as a place of eternal fire, as it is in our text here, and is often how these emotions are described even to this day. But let's note that our text also tells us that this eternal place was prepared for the devil and his angels, and so the place was never intended for humans, which is why it would be such a curse for anybody to end up there. We were never intended to be so far away from God. Well, I hope that all makes sense and brings our text a little bit more into focus. Let's close by establishing 2 points from our text to equip us for our days ahead. Point 1, the sheep and the goats look similar, but they're not the same. So this one is really aimed at Christians, but can be observed even if you're not a believer. So in this text, we see two groups of creatures that may be indistinguishable from a distance, but on closer inspection, we see a massive difference. On the king's return, the sheep were found to be serving the king. Their natural inclination was obedience to him and kindness and love for the king's people. The goats, however, were inactive and neglectful to the king's people. They had no real desire to serve the king because their hearts were not with him. It's no side note or small detail when Jesus says, "The least of these, my brothers and sisters." Jesus is saying, when you neglect or mistreat his people, you are neglecting him. You are mistreating him. And if that develops into an ongoing day-to-day habit, if there's no love, compassion or forgiveness for the people of Jesus, then Jesus is clear you are not serving him. And this calls for a deep inspection of our own actions and evaluation of where our own hearts are. Point number 2. In this text, the sheep are painted as doing right things and the goats are painted as doing wrong things. And this is where the parabolic elements of this text step in to emphasize 2 points. The things done for Jesus, the things not done for Jesus. But people are capable of doing good and bad things, whether they serve Jesus or not, because nobody is perfect, not even Christians. And this is where Jesus steps in. See, Jesus knows what it is to be least. 2,000 years ago, he came to earth, he was tempted, he was beaten, he was tortured, and eventually killed. He took on the weight of mankind's sin. Though unlike other people, he was perfect, and he brought himself to a place of absolute poverty and even death so that all people can inherit this kingdom and be made part of his family. But he is the king of all creation. He conquered that death and continues to reign as king and will return. So whether you are a Christian, atheist, agnostic, whatever, there is one truth, that a day of judgment is coming. Every person will stand before the King in preparation for eternity. Now that day could be in 100 years or it could be tomorrow. I urge all people to look to Jesus today. Look upon his actions because he endured all of those things so that he may call you brother or sister. Who doesn't want a king like that? Amen. Well, I've gone over the 15 minutes, but that's okay. Please like, subscribe, comment, whatever. Bye-bye.